Welcome to Extraterrestrial Reality. Today we're going to talk about a very famous case from 1955, the Kelly Hopkinsville Goblin incident or Goblin encounter. There were almost a dozen people in this house, this old house on this farm property in Kentucky, rural Kentucky, a place called Kelly, Kentucky. And they were besieged one evening by weird creatures, or one creature. It seems it's unclear whether there was more than one. It seems like they would shoot at this thing, it would just keep coming back. You couldn't kill it, whatever it was. And this showed up after one of the people that was in this house saw a flying saucer landing in some gully nearby. Nobody believed him, and then about an hour later, as it was getting darker out, all of a sudden this weird creature comes floating over from where this craft had landed, and the first thing they thought of was pull out the rifles, and that's what they did. They just pull out shotguns, they pull out a .22, and they started shooting at this thing, but it just kept on floating around, getting back up, flying away. Really, really strange case, and it involved a lot of different people. And it's a case where it's hard to really figure out like why, if you think about it, right? When I first heard this story like years ago, I thought, wow, it doesn't make any sense. Like, why? How could some intelligent creature or creatures land on Earth or come to Earth and just show up at someone's house like this and just repeatedly take bullets left and right? And for a while, I remember, I guess it was around 4 years ago, I did an episode where I talked about this case, and I threw out the hypothesis that it might have been some sort of an alien psyop just to see how humans would react, right? But I've changed my mind on that. I don't think that's what it is. I think now I've come up with a better theory that better explains what really happened in Kelly, Kentucky back in August of 1955. I think what this was some sort of a test to see to measure what our weapons could do, measure what domestic weapons could do. You know, what if the creatures were actually physical avatars controlled remotely, or I believe more plausibly automatically? What if they were sent out to test domestic firearms? And that's what was going on there that night. And anyways, that's what we're going to talk about tonight. Before we even get into it, I'll just I wrote up some stuff here on this. I used AI to help me along with this, but I wanted to put something together to explain my hypothesis better. And we'll get into the whole story here in a minute. But basically, what happened here? There were 11 people, 8 adults and 3 children at this house, and we'll get into the story later on. But what happened in this one August 21st into the 22nd? It lasted all night long. This saucer-shaped craft landed nearby. Before long, there was at least one creature that showed up. They kept on shooting at it. It kept on reappearing, disappearing, and it got to the point where they heard it on the roof of their home. They heard scratching sounds, and finally they all jumped into 2 different cars and drove to nearby Hopkinsville, to the sheriff's department there, told them what happened, and then when the law enforcement went back to the house, they searched all over the place. They couldn't find anything, and then after they left, the creature or creatures showed up again, and it just lasted all the way till daybreak, apparently. So that's the story, and we'll get into the fuller story later on. But my belief now, after studying this case and thinking about it, the only thing that really makes sense is that the aliens, it was part of their phase, I think. I mean, really, when you think about it, in 1957, you have the Villas-Boas abduction in Brazil. Now, apparently, abductions may have been happening on and off throughout the decades leading up to the late 50s, early 60s, when you had the Villas-Boas case, and then in 1961, the Betty and Barney Hill case, right? But I believe that it really didn't start in earnest until those years. That's when it really, abduction / hybridization program really started going into full effect, full force. It wasn't, and I think that what happened in Kentucky in 1955 was just a phase trying to test what kind of weapons would just regular domestics have on the property, and how much damage could those weapons do. That's what I think was going on there now, when you really think about it. Because here's the thing. We know for a fact now there's something here. We're not alone, right? There's no question about it. We are definitely not alone. I've talked about the evidence on this show, ad nauseum to this point, right? And I'm just trying to figure out some of these other cases now, including this one right here. This is one of the most puzzling ones because it doesn't really make any sense when you really think about it, right? Unless you think about it this way, the way we're going to talk about it today. So anyway, I outlined a lot of my ideas here today with the help of AI, and we're going to talk about that here on the screen. right now. Okay, the idea that they were physical avatars or drones, that's what I think. I think that whatever that thing or things were that were dispatched onto that home that night in 1955, I think that they were some sort of a physical avatar, a test object, like a robot or something to that effect, to test the weaponry that the people had in that home. And here's some of the ideas I wrote out here. It says, if the goblins wore avatars or drones rather than true beings, their metallic or silvery appearance could be skin-like plating or protective coating. Yes, these creatures, they were silver-looking. Now, of course, some people say that the green aliens, the green-skinned aliens, comes from this story, but that's not really the case. Really, these things were silver. So this thing was silver in color. Thing or things, we can't really say. Anyway, the floating, gliding movement described by some witnesses could be anti-gravity or low mass motion, not the awkward gait of living beings. Yeah, they were very stiff the way these creature moved. Their lack of vocal communication, there was no speech, only gestures or movements, also fits unmanned systems. Yeah, when they first saw this creature approaching from where the object, the UFO, had landed, it was approaching them with these long arms, right? They were almost touching their feet. That's how long their arms were, with these sharp talons for fingers, right? And then it lifted up its hands, like, come on, like giving up or something. But all that did was cause these people in this house at that night to start firing at them. Anyway, continuing here, this would also explain why the beings seemed impervious to bullets, either because they were armored or they were cheaply expendable probes designed to take hits without risk to a living pilot. Yes. That's what I believe. I believe that these things, there was no chance of anything getting killed that night because there was nothing there that was living. I think that what this was, or what these things were robots of some sort, something designed to take heavy fire, and then later on they could look at the bullet holes in this thing and take measurements and then take precautions right before they launched their abduction / hybridization program. Okay, number 2, testing human firearms. This is actually one of the most plausible strategic motives if these were probes. The beings seemed to deliberately approach the house even after being fired on. They didn't retaliate, but kept presenting themselves to view and to fire. The case resulted in multiple gunshots fired at close range, 22s and shotguns at point blank, yet the goblins were unharmed or deflected the shots. From an alien reconnaissance perspective, it would make sense to gauge rural firearm readiness, how fast humans arm themselves, what weapons they use, how accurate they are at night, test the effects of human bullets on your shielding or drone design, collect acoustic data from gunfire, bullet impacts, and the psychological reaction time of armed humans. Then I have number 3 here, remote versus autonomous control. Remote controlled avatars. They're piloted from a nearby craft or even from orbit. I would have to imagine that these things, whatever it was controlled, if it was remotely controlled, from the craft that had landed nearby this home. The operators see through the avatar's sensors in real time. The bright object in the sky was the command vehicle, yeah. But I don't think that would be the case. I think these are probably automatic. I don't think that they would be used. I don't think they would need to sit there like with a joystick like it was an Atari or something. I think that these things are pre-programmed to approach human dwellings, observe, and withstand hostile reactions. The behavior described, approach, retreat, approach again, could be a simple behavioral loop rather than conscious choice. This would also explain why they didn't use weapons, communicate, or flee decisively. Either way, it's low-risk reconnaissance, no alien lives at stake, just machines. And then I have number 4 here. Why that farm? It might not have been random. Rural Kentucky in 1955. Isolated, low chance of military response. High chance of armed civilians, ideal for firearm testing. A farmhouse with multiple occupants provides a controlled social group to observe under stress. So yeah, that's why they would have picked something like that. Out of the way, nobody's going to bother them during their test of the human firearms. Yeah, exactly. That's why they would choose something like that. Number 5, how this theory fits the data. The metallic look, drones or armored avatars. The large reflective eyes, these beings had these large yellow reflective eyes. They could have been sensor lenses or night optics. Clawed hands, that could have been manipulator appendages, not fingers. Bullet immunity, that could have been energy shielding or just expendable synthetic bodies. No injury to humans, purely observational mission. And then the implication here is if the Hopkinsville Goblins were indeed automated avatars sent to test human firearms, then this was an early Cold War era baseline test of rural United States armament by a non-human intelligence. Later sightings of similar beings might represent updated models or different mission profiles. Now, before we move on, I just want to point out there's a really good PDF. I'm going to leave it in the description. It's a book that was it's available online. It's called Close Encounter at Kelly, and there was other stories from 1955. This was written by Isabel Davis and Ted Blocher, and it was published in 1978. You'll get this. Read this whole this document lays this whole incident out. Right, it gives you all the witnesses, all of the skeptics' responses, everything you want to know about this Hopkinsville Goblin incident. You'll find in this document. It's almost 200 pages long, or around 200 pages long, and actually, excuse me, it's over 200 pages long, and it has other stories, but mostly it focuses on the Kelly Hopkinsville case from 1955. And anyway, here I just want to list all the different people that were there. There was Mrs. Glennie Langford. She was age 50. She was a widow of Oscar Langford, her second husband. Also there was Elmer Lucky Sutton. He was 25, and he was Mrs. Langford's son by her first husband, who was deceased, Tillman Sutton. There was Vera Sutton. That was Elmer's wife. She was 29. There was J.C. or John Charlie Sutton, 21. He was Mrs. Langford's son by her first husband. There was Aileen Sutton. That was his wife, 27. That was J.C.'s wife. And also there was Mrs. Langford's children by Oscar Langford, her second husband. That's Lonnie Langford, 12, Charlie Langford, 10, Mary Langford, 7. There was also Billy Ray Taylor, 21. He was a friend of Lucky's. There was also his wife, June Taylor. She was 18 at the time. And also one other person was there, O.P. Baker. He was 30 or 35 years old, and he was the brother of Aileen Sutton. They were all hanging out that night. None of them were drinking. That was established, although later on a lot of the debunkers would claim that they must have been drunk, right? I'm going to tell you something about that. Just let me, especially in my younger days, there were times I would get bombed out of my mind, right? I mean, really bombed. When I was in college, I went for college for a year. For many years during my, my early 20s and beyond, there was times, the Irish in me, I don't know. But I never saw any I never saw a pink elephant. I never saw anything when I was drunk. I had no hallucinations whenever I was drunk, at any time in my life. Now, I don't really drink that much anymore, here and there, a couple here and there. You get older, you don't want to do that. But I hate when I hear this. Usually people who have hallucinations is the people who try to quit drinking. So and the debunkers will go on and say, well, there's 11 people there, including 3 young kids. They're going to tell me that all of them were all drunk and sharing the same hallucination. That's absolute nonsense. In fact, I have a new name for the debunkers that I came up with. I want to share this. It's an acronym. Anymore, I'm going to call them MSLIs, or that stands for moronic, scared, and/or lying idiots. Okay, MSLIs. Look out for them. Right? They'll lie to you. They're scared. They're morons, and plus they're idiots on top of it. I think MSLIs just encapsulate everything I think about when I think about a debunker. Okay. So anyway, that's the setup. There were all the people that were there that night. And before we go on, I just want to go hit this article here. This was an article from thehistory.com. It says here, why are aliens so often depicted as little green men with bulbous heads and oversized eyes? The mythology began in part on the night of August 21st, 1955, when a large extended farm family called the Suttons arrived breathlessly at the Hopkinsville police station in southwestern Kentucky. Their story of a terrifying siege of otherworldly beings would become one of the most detailed and baffling accounts of an alien encounter on record, notable for the large number of witnesses, the duration of the encounter, which was several hours, and the close proximity between the witnesses and creatures, sometimes just a few feet away. The incident quickly became regional and even national news. The alleged encounter occurred on the Sutton's farm in the tiny rural hamlet of Kelly, Kentucky, where the family lived in an unpainted 3-room house without running water, telephone, radio, TV, or books. Of all the details of their story, the UFO landing and the appearance of small alien creatures, one fact is indisputable. When the 8 adults and 3 children arrived at the nearby Hopkinsville police station at about 11 p.m., they were genuinely terror-struck. These aren't the kind of people who normally run to the police for help, Police Chief Russell Greenwell later told investigators. What they do is reach for their guns, yet Here they were, women and children, hysterical, and one man with a pulse of 140 beats per minute measured by an investigator. And then they have some images here what this creature looked. These are some drawings that occur later on. I'll be posting them on here. And I also have some AI generated images that I created as well. It says here, according to accounts given to the police, at about 7 p.m. on the hot Sunday evening, Sutton family friend Billy Ray Taylor was fetching water from the backyard well when he saw a silvery object, real bright with an exhaust all the colors of the rainbow. As he later recounted, it came silently toward the house, passed over it, stopped in the air, and then dropped straight to the ground. Taylor, 21, and his 18-year-old wife had come from Pennsylvania to visit Lucky Sutton, with whom he had worked on a traveling carnival. The Suttons, 50-year-old widow and matriarch Glennie Langford, her two older sons and their wives, a brother-in-law, and the widow's three younger children, didn't take Billy Ray seriously, laughing off his UFO account. An hour later, alerted by the dog's incessant barking, Lucky and Billy Ray went to the back door and made out a strange glow, in the midst of which they spied a small humanoid creature. About 3.5 feet tall, it had an oversized head almost perfectly round, its arms extended almost to the ground, its hands had talons, and its oversized eyes glowed with a yellowish light. The body gave off an eerie shimmer in the light of the night's new moon, they said, as if made of silver metal. So there, it wasn't green like a lot of people later would claim. No, it was like silver metal. Terrified, the two men grabbed a 20-gauge shotgun and a .22 rifle and fired at the little man, its hands now raised as if held up at gunpoint as it came toward the back door. They reported that it then did a flip, scrambled upright, and fled into the darkness. Shortly after, the men saw a similar creature appear in a side window and fired through the window screen. Still impervious to bullets, the little man again flipped, then disappeared. I went out in the hallway and crouched down next to Billy when I saw one approaching the door, Mrs. Langford told Isabel Davis, author of an extensive report called Close Encounters at Kelly and Others of 1955. It looked like a 5-gallon gasoline can with a head on top and small legs. It was a shimmering bright metal like on my refrigerator. And then they have some more images here in this, more drawings of what this thing might have looked like. The drama escalated when Taylor stepped outside under the small overhanging roof, and those behind him saw a claw-like hand reach down and touch his hair. The group screamed and pulled Taylor back while Lucky shot above the overhang and then at another similar creature in a nearby wood. It floated to the ground and then scurried into the woods. And I just want to point out that Mrs. Langford later told the investigator Isabel Davis a year later that they never saw more than one of these creatures at the same time. So it could be that it was just one and just kept on disappearing and reappearing somewhere else. And when they would hit it, shoot it, point blank, it would make a noise like you were shooting a metal pail. Anyway, continuing here with the article, it says the Suttons moved inside and spent several hours listening for movements, hearing mostly occasional scratches on the roof. At 11 p.m., the whole group ran for their cars and hightailed it to the Hopkinsville police station at top speed. After the local police chief called for backup, his team was joined at the Sutton farm by state police, military police from nearby Fort Campbell, and a photographer from the Kentucky New Era. There, investigators found shell casings from the gunshots, but no other evidence. Neither could they find proof of heavy drinking. According to the Sutton matriarch, liquor was not allowed in the farmhouse. Let me just stop there. But that doesn't stop debunkers later on from accusing these people of being drunk anyway. Right? Once the police and others left, though, the creatures returned between 2:30 a.m. and daybreak. Mrs. Langford said she saw one glowing repeatedly by her bedside window, its claw-like hand on the screen. And then there's a drawing here of the craft, the spaceship that they saw, that one of the witnesses saw, Billy Ray. It says here, in the following days, after radio stations and newspapers, including the New York Times, reported the incident, hundreds of curiosity seekers descended on the farm, often ridiculing the Suttons as ignorant or fraudulent. When no trespassing signs proved useless at discouraging them, the family tried charging admission, 50 cents for entering the grounds, $1 for information, $10 for taking pictures. After that, skeptics blasted them as fortune-seeking fabulists. As the Kelly story spread into the world, it took on a life of its own. The number of little men grew to a dozen or more. A few years later, the little metallic men were conflated with an Eastern Kentucky woman's report of a flying saucer and a 6-foot-tall man in green, helping launch the myth of little green men. The day after the incident, police investigators returned to the farmhouse searching for evidence of a saucer landing, footprints, blood trails, or scratch marks on the roof. They found nothing. Bud Ledwith, a local radio station employee, interviewed the adult eyewitnesses and made drawings based on their accounts. According to Davis, he was impressed by the remarkable specificity and consistency, even though the men were away from the farmhouse all day, unable to coordinate with the others. While the incident eventually attracted the attention of the Air Force, UFO investigation program Project Blue Book, documents suggest that its team never officially pursued the matter beyond checking in with their Fort Campbell counterparts who had been briefly at the scene the first night. One of the most thorough investigations of the Kelly incident was taken in 1956 by ufologist Isabel Davis and published several decades later by the Center for UFO Studies, a group founded by astronomer J. Allen Hynek, Project Blue Book's civilian investigator. Her nearly 200-page report, co-written with Ted Blocher, includes detailed maps, documentary records, summaries of similar accounts around the world, and interviews with several Sutton family members and police investigators. Davis summarized the latter's concern about the lack of physical evidence. Let me just talk about the physical evidence, right? They were looking for footprints. The ground was hard. There's all these little things that people were looking for they couldn't find. That's because the ground was hard. And plus, the thing was floating around most of the time. That's another thing. They couldn't find anything on the roof. There was some scratching sounds, but God knows. I mean, what does that matter? I mean, you have 11 people that said they saw this thing. 11 people, including 3 kids, right? But of course, the dummies among us don't want to believe in this. They're too afraid to face reality. Anyway, continuing here, it says, but to her reckoning, none of the possible explanations, a deliberate hoax, a publicity play, group hallucinations, made sense. While questions arose about whether the young men were exaggerating, possibly fueled by hidden stores of liquor, Davis's strong impression after meeting Mrs. Langford was one of a somber, no-nonsense matriarch who abhorred the limelight and had no reason to lie. None of the witnesses, Davis noted, had any history of making preposterous allegations. And there's more to this story, and you can check it out. I'll leave the links for everything here, like I always do. But I would highly recommend the full 200-page plus document. I'll leave the link for that too if you're interested in this. But getting back to this, here, my theory is this: is like I think they were using that thing, whatever it was, or things, as an avatar, a physical avatar, to test the firearms that regular people had, because they were planning. This was like a phase, a part of their abduction program, right? That's what I think. That's what it seems like to me. And so I offer here's a timeline in context here. I wanted to throw this out here. So 1955, the Hopkinsville Kelly Goblins, small, resilient beings, appear at a rural farmhouse, withstand heavy gunfire. They retreat, but they persist. And then in 1957, Antonio Villas Boas case in Brazil. That was one of the earliest widely publicized alien abduction reports involving medical/sexual procedures and alleged hybridization attempts. And then 1961 and onward, Betty and Barney Hill, Pascagoula, and others. More structured abduction narratives emerge, including sperm/ova extraction and hybrid-type claims. If these cases represent stages in a program, the sequence makes sense. Okay, stage 1, recon and threat assessment. Deploy small drones/avatars to rural areas to measure human readiness, weapons, and reaction times. Stage 2, controlled close contact. Begin one-off abductions in isolated settings, farmers, drivers, etc., to test capture procedures and medical/biological extraction. And then stage 3, programmatic operations. Scale up abductions, refine hybridization techniques, and implement memory suppression protocols, as we know from later cases. And why would there be a threat assessment? Why would they do that first? Well, humans in the 1950s were heavily armed in rural areas, especially in the United States and Brazil. A shot from a 12 gauge or a 30-06 at close range could easily kill an unarmored biological entity. So you'd need to know how fast humans arm themselves after a sighting, accuracy under stress at night, what kinds of weapons are common, how many people are likely to shoot versus how many people are likely to flee. And why do drones/avatars fit this profile? No loss of life for the visitors if they're destroyed. Shielded or resilient forms to survive initial contact. Programmable behaviors like approach, retreat, reapproach to provoke repeated reactions and gather data. Sensory arrays disguised as eyes or appendages to record audio/visual and maybe even ballistics. Yeah, like those eyes, these yellow eyes on these creatures. Like that was another thing. Like some of the limbs of these creatures, they weren't bending. They were just that's not how they were designed, right? You wonder, well, why even have legs if they don't bend? And then here, the hybrid program angle. By the time of the Villas-Boas abduction in 1957, the alleged beings were already performing medical procedures and collecting biological samples. They claimed through gestures or telepathy that he would father hybrid children. Yes, that's what happened in that case. He was forced basically to have intercourse with some hybrid half-alien, apparent half-alien, half-human creature, and then this creature grunted like an animal, which made him disgusted. And then when it was all over, she pointed to her stomach and then pointed up to the sky like, okay, I'm going to have your baby up in space somewhere. That's what it seemed like to him anyway. Anyway, I conclude here. It says, that's a jump in sophistication from peering in windows in Kentucky to full biological interfacing in Brazil. Exactly the sort of escalation you'd expect after a preliminary threat assessment phase. Okay, so let's put it all together here. If you chart it as a military-style campaign by an outside intelligence, Phase 0, pre-1950s, observations and craft sightings. Phase 1, mid-1950s, deploy small autonomous avatars to gauge human defenses. Phase 2, late 1950s, begin limited biological sampling on isolated individuals like Villas-Boas. And then Phase 3, the 1960s and onward, full-scale abduction/medical program with psychological and memory manipulation. It's almost a textbook operational rollout. Reconnaissance, then limited incursions, then full implementation. This theory takes the Hopkinsville event out of the realm of random scary goblins and turns it into a logically planned probe, a kind of stress test before the real abduction program begins. It's one of the few frameworks that actually makes the sequence of cases make sense. Yeah. See, this makes sense to me, more so than anything. I was going to do a story, I was thinking about it. I was thinking about, wouldn't it be interesting if cell phones had been available in 1955? What would we have seen? I was thinking about, that's how I started thinking about this, a few days ago. And then I started doing some more research, doing some more reading, doing the whole shamil all over again. And then it came to me. I realized, because it sounds ridiculous. When you first hear this story, it just sounds like, why? It doesn't make any sense. Now I think this has to be it. It doesn't make me right. I think this is the best hypothesis that we're talking about right here. They were testing our weapons. They were testing the kinds of weapons that people, just regular old Joes had. Because that's where they were targeting. They were just targeting people for this abduction/hybridization programs. But they had to make sure, well, what could happen if one of them pulls out a weapon? We got to figure that out. I think that's what might have happened here in Kelly, Kentucky, back in 1955. And I get into it more here with direct ballistics profiling. Number 1 here. If the avatars' bodies were engineered to register and absorb gunfire without being destroyed, every hit would give precise data on caliber, muzzle velocity, energy transfer, spread pattern, penetration depth, and angle of fire. Microsensors in the body could record shock waves, heat signatures, and even chemical residue from gunpowder. Over multiple encounters, they could build a complete ballistics library of civilian weapons by region. This is basically the alien version of a body armor test lab, except the test subjects are walking into real-world situations. Number 2, behavior under fire. It's not just about the bullet physics. It's also about human response. How quickly do people go for guns? Do they aim for the body or the head? Do they shoot once and retreat or keep firing? Does a group behave differently than a single individual? Your goblin avatars could have cameras, audio pickups, or even biometric sensors to study heart rates, yelling, or group coordination in real time. And then another thing would be, why would they be creature-shaped? Well, it might seem odd to make the avatars look like goblins instead of, say, neutral spheres, but that could be deliberate, triggering maximum fight or flight response. A small, weird creature at your window is more likely to provoke a gun response than a glowing orb. Testing intimidation, the clawed hands and large eyes might be variables to see what shapes make humans shoot faster or hesitate longer. Scalability, small humanoid forms are easier to maneuver in buildings, windows, and rural terrain, a likely environment for future abduction operations. Number 4, the operational value of this. If, after Hopkinsville, the visitors had a complete threat map of U.S. civilian firearms, data on how fast humans escalate to lethal force, proof that their shielding / armor can withstand those weapons, then they'd know exactly how much force, stealth, or shielding they'd need to safely conduct abductions or hybridization procedures without losing personnel or equipment. This is basically risk assessment before field operations. See how it all falls into place here, how this whole hypothesis works? This is what it probably was, folks. This is the best idea, I believe, the best hypothesis that explains this crazy incident from 1955. And then the next step, the Villas-Boas case 2 years later would then make sense. They'd already proven their avatars can withstand fire. They'd already seen how humans respond to visitors. Now they're confident enough to physically take a human, perform procedures, and return him without a firefight. The bottom line, if the creatures were engineered, bullet-absorbing test avatars, then the Hopkinsville event wasn't just a random close encounter. It was a live-fire test of human readiness and weapons, the equivalent of an alien pre-mission war game. That information would be immensely helpful to anyone planning covert biological or abduction operations on Earth. And I believe, ladies and gentlemen, we have figured it out. I believe that this is what happened in Hopkinsville, Kelly, and in Kentucky back in 1955. I think that this was a test of our weapons. That's what I believe it was. Now, of course, we had a whole array of different explanations put forward by the morons, debunkers, the MSLIs, right? The moronic, scared, and or lying idiots, right? And let's go look at Wikipedia, because Wikipedia is always chock full of that kind of nonsense. Some people try to tell us it was an owl, like the late debunker Joe Nickel, who just died earlier this year. But anyway, we'll talk about that in a second. Now, they have a picture here, right? If you're looking at this, they have a picture here of the described creature next to an owl. The described creature looks nothing like an owl, but yet that's what debunker, the late Joe Nickel, tried to say. Anyway, it says here, psychologists Rodney Schmaltz and Scott Lilienfeld cite the alleged incident as an example of pseudoscience and an extraordinary claim to help students develop critical thinking skills. Although contemporary newspaper stories reported that all officials appeared to agree that there was no drinking involved, Schmaltz and Lilienfeld suggest that intoxication may have played a part in the sighting. So, even though all the people that investigated this case said there was no booze involved, these two knuckleheads say, we don't believe it. There had to be. There had to be. Again, moronic, scared, and or lying idiots. Okay? That's their new name. Committee for Skeptical Inquiry member and skeptic Joe Nickel notes that the family could have misidentified eagle owls or great horned owls, which are nocturnal, fly silently, have yellow eyes, and aggressively defend their nests. According to Nickel, meteor sightings also occurred at the time that could explain Billy Ray Taylor's claim that he saw a bright light streak across the sky and disappear beyond a tree line some distance from the house. Okay, so this reminds me of the raccoons and coyotes nonsense coming from Mick West, right? Same old stories, same old nonsense. Oh, we'll just say it's an owl. These people are stupid to think anything else. That's all it is. That's all this is. All nonsense from Joe Nickel. Then, of course, they have Brian Dunning. Why anybody would trust a word this guy says, I have no idea. Why is this guy put up there like some know-it-all skeptic? I mean, come on. Read up on this guy and you'll know what I'm talking about. Author Brian Dunning noted that the height of the owls would be comparable to at least the lower end of the reported range of around 2 feet. There are simply too many similarities between the creatures reported by the families and an aggressive pair of the local horned owls, which do stand about 2/3 of a meter tall, except he doesn't explain why, when they were shot at point blank range, why did they keep coming back? Did the owls have armored shielding? Like, what are they talking about? 11 people said they didn't see an owl. They said they saw these little creatures, 3-foot tall creatures with long arms coming at them, floating around. They're shooting them at them at point blank range. But there's no reason to get upset about what the debunkers say. I think we figured this one out, folks. I think that this is what it was. I can't prove this. I think that the theory that we're talking about here, this testing of the artillery that a domestic family might have, right? I think that's what this was all about. That's what they were doing. This was a test. Now, I know some people are going to say that these abductions and stuff started before 1957, before the Villas-Boas case. Yeah, there's been sporadic but it was nothing like it would be later on, right? Nothing like we would hear like from the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, right? Nothing like that beforehand, right? It seems like they were going through different phases here, figuring things out. I mean, just think, in 1954, you had all these landings all over France for some reason, people seeing humanoids all over the place. Then you have this one here in Kentucky, and it seems to me that they were just testing things. They wanted to see these creatures sent out some sort of a physical avatar. I would have to imagine it was automatically controlled. It was already pre-programmed. I don't think somebody was sitting there with a joystick. I don't think a gray alien was sitting in the flying saucer with an Atari joystick moving the thing around. No. That thing was sent out on a mission, pre-programmed, and then it came back and they had all the data they needed from it. That's what I think happened. Doesn't make me right, but I think that's the best hypothesis for this Kelly Hopkinsville goblin incident. That's where I'm at with it. Anyway, I just want to say this. I want to say thank you all for joining me today. Until next time.